What does it mean to be open-minded? For me, it means admitting sometimes you don't know. How are people so certain of the narrative they've been told? I spoke to a friend about the Albert Dock and how I thought the whole story of the docks seemed far-fetched and ridiculous to me. And I was instantly reminded of the narrative as he fought to defend it. They'll say, of course it's possible to build a dock in the 1800s in less than 5 years, sometimes 1 year. There were more people working on the project and you didn't have to pay them as much, so it was cheaper to do large-scale projects than it is now, and they had cranes. So what about when you go further back in time, like looking at the pyramids or the Temple of Horus in Edfu? Well, they still only had cranes and pulleys. Nobody made any advancements in technology until the 1800s. This is the time when everything is invented and then showcased at the world's fairs. It could be true. I'd just like some proof. We're going to be using this book today as a reference to dive deep into the story of architecture. Let's go look at some docks. Welcome to Shiny Boots. Chapter 18. The Rise of the Iron Masters. It was an age of uncertainty, but it was also an age that witnessed the emergence of a powerful new force in society, the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie were the real victors of the French Revolution and its aftermath. Work and leisure were shaped by them, no longer by the great aristocratic patrons of the 18th century, and not yet, if indeed ever, by the working classes in whose name the revolution was said to have been made. The architecture of the 19th century was designed to meet middle-class aspirations. There was another revolution every bit as influential as the French, the Industrial Revolution. It was cradled in Britain from roughly 1750 to 1850. It began with the exploitation of natural phenomena, especially water and coal, and found its first achievements in Britain and then spread with relentless force throughout the world. That was the Victorians, wasn't it? The urban population dramatically increased. Towns and cities multiplied in number and size. A new urban society emerged. Okay, what numbers are we talking here? 5,000 people in 1700. 1726, Liverpool Castle was demolished. Yeah, Liverpool had a castle for their handful of residents in 1650, and it's even there in 1572. Where was the castle? Oh yeah, on Castle Street, and where that plug hole is, where Victoria's monument now stands. Let's continue. The buildings and artefacts of industry provided knowledge and experience that could be adapted to architecture, which now grew at an unprecedented rate. The Albert Dock in Liverpool, for example, designed by Jesse Hartley and opened by Prince Albert. I had a look, and Prince Albert is Victoria's first cousin. You can find out about royalty's inbreeding in this video. Albert Dock was a vast warehouse scheme covering over 7 acres, with iron-framed buildings clad in brick and resting on massive cast-iron Doric columns. One of the masterpieces of the industrial architecture. Doric columns. Yeah, Doric pillars, like what the Greeks and Romans were doing. On the other side of the Pennines, a young architect, Cuthbert Broderick, won the competition for Leeds Town Hall in 1853. I showed Leeds Town Hall in my last video. Hang on a minute, what's this? Broderick won the competition and it was judged by Charles Barry. Charles Barry is spoken about in this chapter, which is the reason why I recognised his name. Here's what it says. In 1834, a fire destroyed the Palace of Westminster, except for the Great Hall. The competition for a new palace to house Lords and Commons was won by Charles Barry in 1836. Okay, so there was a fire, and then a competition was won by Charles Barry, and then later on he would be on the panel judging future competitions to construct buildings. Barry was a skilled exponent of the classical style. He had created the very symbol of the rise of the middle-class political power in the Travellers' Club of 1827 and the Reform Club of 1837 in Pall Mall. Both were in his Italianate manner. Inside the Reform Club had a large glazed court, a prototype of the central hall common to later 19th century monumental planning. With his usual concern for technical modernity, Barry installed a very advanced steam kitchen for the famous chef Alexis Soyer. So Charles Barry is ahead of his time, and he usually designs buildings in the classical or Italian style. His problem with the Houses of Parliament was that the government had decided that the new building should be in the style thought to represent England at its best. Elizabethan or Jacobean. That required greater knowledge of late Gothic than Barry possessed. Oh no. He had produced a logical classical plan which could easily have been given classical elevations, but to make them Gothic, he recruited the greatest living authority, Augustus Welby Northmore Pugin. That is a mouthful. In addition to the Houses of Parliament, Pugin designed several hundred churches, 5 cathedrals, a number of great houses, and wrote and published major works on Gothic architecture and furniture. This is an interesting side note. Pugin had published this series called Contrasts. He selected 2 types of buildings, one from the present day, which would have been around the 1830s, 40s, and a corresponding one from the Middle Ages. He was arguing for a revival of the medieval Gothic style because essentially he was saying modern buildings were cheap and not as well constructed as those in the 15th century. Which I think is quite funny because we're contrasting modern buildings to Victorian buildings now. Pugin believed that the decline in architecture and its beauty reflected society as a whole, and how society in the 1800s was losing its soul. He contrasted ancient poor houses with modern ones, not only with how they looked, architecturally speaking, but also how people were treated. Originally, these poorhouses cared for the poor and sick as a spiritual duty, whereas in the 18th and 19th centuries, they became more prison-like and were more focused on discipline and social control. Bethlehem Hospital, that opened in 1247, is an example of this. These medieval hospitals were also known as priories and looked like castles. They transformed over time and became madhouses. Bethlehem Hospital turned into Bedlam. And unfortunately, at age 40, that's exactly where Pugin ended up. If you want to learn more around this topic, check out my video on asylums. Let's finish with what is said about this building. One building, more than any other in Britain, brought these discoveries together and became the most influential innovation of its time. Influencing because thousands of people came to see it. Not just thousands, it was like millions, wasn't it? That was the Crystal Palace in London, housing the Great Exhibition of 1851. It was the brainchild, not of an architect, but of a gardener, Joseph Paxton. The Crystal Palace was prefabricated. It was light and transparent, supported and enclosed by iron and glass. Its form was revolutionary in that it was indeterminate. There was no reason why it should not be made bigger or smaller, longer or wider. No reason, none at all. Its erection depended upon railway transport and sophisticated organisation of the site. It was constructed in 9 months, and it could be taken down and put up again, as it was at Sydenham in 1852, where it survived until it was destroyed by fire in 1936. Paxton designed this one before the Crystal Palace. It's at Chatsworth House, or rather, it used to be at Chatsworth House until 1920. This was called the Great Conservatory. It took them 4 years to build it, as opposed to 9 months, even though Crystal Palace was 25 times bigger. This is what Chatsworth House looks like. Let's end with Socrates again. The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. I'm open to hearing all of your thoughts and knowledge on anything I've spoken about. Subscribe and like the video. Keep digging, friends, and allow the mind to be free. I'll catch you in the next one.